It's my pleasure to introduce Brendan Mallon, Head of Product and Services in BBC Archives Technology and Services, and Ian Munford, our Principal Business Development Specialist at AWS for Media Services in EMEA. Today, they're going to be talking about preserving 100 years of a nation's archive. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, gentlemen.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kelly. So, welcome to what I think is probably going to be the last session before happy hour, right? So, as any good show, we've saved the best till last. That's exactly what So, what we're going to do in this session is we're going to explore how innovation is really capable of driving change in business operations, but actually driving real value back into our business. And what we're going to do is we're going to use an exciting project which the BBC started a number of years ago, actually, to effectively archive well, we'll go into some of the detail of that, but to archive some of their core assets, but more importantly, to use that to drive real value and tangible value back into the organization. And to help me do that, we have Mr. Brendan Mallon, needs no introduction often. And really what we're going to do is explore how what is, a really quite innovative team dealt with some big, hairy, gnarly challenges of getting a lot of assets into the cloud. So, without further ado, let's go in. So, I'm gonna start off, by actually saying, just to kind of, provide some context, this is 100 years of BBC archive, and I have to say is that there's a big chunk of the UK national TV archive is in there, to be honest. So, can you just sort of shed some light on this? So what's in it? Like, how big is it? Like, what's in it? What's there?
Well, we've got absolutely everything. We've got the original sort of bladderphone recorder machines and the original recordings. We've got shellac recordings, something like 6 million plus, images on glass negatives, millions and millions of videotapes and audio tapes of every format, shape and size. We've got, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of boxes of sort of, written documents, and probably the world's, I think it's either the second or the third in the world largest sheet music library. So, it's got absolutely everything under the sun. If you want a unique format, you're going to find it there.
So, like, just in terms of quantity, we're talking roughly 16 odd million assets?
Yeah, 16 million and over 1 million film cans, for example.
Wow. Okay. So literally everything you could shake a stick at over the last 100 years. Okay, fine. So that's a big, horrible challenge. One of the things I am going to say is that, BBC globally is known for its best practice of managing archives. They're preserving their archives, and anybody that's been to a facility will know that. Can you maybe give us some more context as to what drove you to look at moving some of the archive into the cloud? What was the instigator of this initiative?
If you sort of boil down to the roots of this, production really has started in silos. So large news production systems, large sports production systems, and they all had their own way of working. And the data sets within them were sort of very much sort of, fixed and of their time within those sort of systems. But, if you spring forward, into the future, life after linear, where you're trying to get your, maximize the value of your content, you need sort of, standard data sets, standard workflows. So it's very much around sort of a strategy of standardization of the workflow of the media delivery chain, but also those sort of separate silo production systems had their own separate MAM systems and their own separate storage repositories. So there's, there's multiple sort of MAM systems, multiple storage repositories. So it's very much around sort of trying to, add value for the audiences, streamline the process, and make the content more accessible to everyone.
So, not to paraphrase, but accessibility was a key key driving factor. Standardization came out loud and clear there. And I'm assuming, and for those who are not aware, but the BBC have effectively had a number of different archive. Don't necessarily want to call it silos, but I'm going to call it silos, right? So it's bringing all of that together to provide goodness. Okay, so that's no mean feat then. So let's turn now to looking at some of the kind of activities you guys do. So that's a big task. From your perspective, what were the kind of things that you were thinking about? Where were the gotchas that you were looking for? And give us a kind of a story of what was keeping you awake at night as you started.
Okay, so the corporate archive really was a sort of a managed service from the get-go. So it was a collection of sort of services that we were consuming. So first of all, our big challenge was to bring those back in-house and standardize them. When we were looking at sort of moving to the cloud, so the first key question on my mind really was around preservation and how do we sort of assure the integrity of the content. But talk about that down the road a wee bit. From the get-go, we talked about analyzing how we would sort of analyze the size of and the shape of the content in terms of the content that we had digitized, the content that we have to digitize, and the quality of that. So it was very much around sort of looking at a business sort of benefits case around sort of how we would approach this from a quality and a preservation view. And we spent sort of probably a disproportionate amount of time at the start just in terms of trying to sort of guarantee that preservation, because without the preservation element, then you haven't really got anything.
So let me just pick up on a few little points there. And I want to pick up on the point you made around file integrity. But if I understand that correctly, what you were doing is you were analyzing. Basically, you were providing a business case for what each of the different silos or genres, or how did that kind of manifest itself?
So there's different approaches in terms of storage between sort of object-based storage and something like a virtual file system. So we started with sort of the one use case that we had, which has been our main television corporate archive, which is around sort of the object-based sort of the data system. And that was sort of an archive then for all of the television content, all the main television programs, Blue Planet, all of those, Doctor Who, all of that type of stuff, as well as the news archive. So they were all sort of stored onto one storage system. So, that's where we sort of really focused very much our initial sort of use case on. So we contracted Cloud First to run some analysis on that, and based on that analysis, we then built a bit of a business plan around how long things would take, how much resource it would need, and genuinely the overall approach.
Thank you. So big call out to CloudFirst.io, who big partner of AWS and yourself. So you mentioned file integrity. And let's explore that a little bit. So how were you sort of sending content into the cloud, but still managing sort of I guess you were still managing day-to-day operations?
Yeah, and that's probably one of the sort of the hardest challenges that Brian and the team in Cloud First had to help us with, because obviously you've got a legacy infrastructure, a legacy Oracle T10K type drives. And you don't want to invest in new technology or more technology for that. So how we approached that very much was around sort of pulling the content back and understanding sort of how it was originally sort of archived in terms of its hash value, comparing the hash value, and then doing that sort of AWS erasure encoding on premise. And then after it's been multi-part uploaded, then querying the AWS APIs to make sure that the figures that we produced on-prem then match the AWS figures. So therefore, we had an identical match between our original hash value and what was in AWS.
And were you able to, not go into too much detail on that one, but were you able to sort of, almost standardize that as an approach? And did that really help you realize commercial value quicker?
It did, but it's only our standard in terms of it's only valid for our use case in terms of the chunk size that we've picked. And so I suppose that's probably one area where we would like to sort of see, maybe more standardization in terms of, chunk size, hash values, and our approach to hashing. So, we picked a particular chunk size. We did all the AWS hashing on-prem, and then we did that hash of chunk sum hashing values as well. So we went as far as we could within our domain, but it's still sort of, I wouldn't say arbitrary, but it's it would break if we picked a different chunk size, for example.
And so I'd say, well, let's move on to the next phase. So we've got content being effectively ingested into the cloud. You're starting to see value. You're realizing value. I'm assuming that's from deprecating equipment, etc. What next? So what was the next thing that you guys had to kind of get around?
Well, it was getting the content up was a sort of a bit of a labor of love. So again, that with Cloud First, that we managed to peak out at 120 terabytes per day, and we used the direct connect facility up to AWS. And our director in digital distribution sort of warned us a couple of times because we were abusing his infrastructure. So that's sort of the long and short of that one. Where we're going next very much is around sort of the data side, because I think, now that we have a sort of an abstraction for the storage and a way of getting the storage in a standard form into AWS, we are now sort of concentrating on the data and metadata side, so that we can then start to look at sort of how we consolidate some of the MAM spaces.
And so I guess this is part of that sort of standardization, that bringing together, removing of silos. So it's having the ability for the organization to access in a secure way those assets.
Yeah. Cool. So where we started was, because we had those sort of 9 separate silos, we could take content out and put it into a search aggregation layer, then go down under the hood of each of the MAM systems and start to bring it out. But where we'd like to get to then is, having a common data set, having a common standard process, and having it completely automated, and then, running, content enrichment, machine learning, all of that type of goodly stuff. So, that's very much the direction of travel for the future.
Hats off. And I do think that, that speed of transfer was pretty startling. So, if anybody can beat that, let us know. But that's going some. More on that if I can see, if we pop your hand up from CloudFirst.io. There we go. You want to talk about that speed? There we go. So I'm gonna raise it up a bit. So let's look at the next question from an industry perspective, and I can see there's a few ISVs in the audience. So having been through that sort of process of basically setting the project up and starting to ingest, I guess with the benefit of hindsight, what's missing? Where do we as an industry need to innovate? What do we need to be thinking about to support organizations like yourselves who are embarking on that kind of initiative?
So, big question, but if you were looking at it from where we were sort of trying to start, the metadata, try to consolidate the metadata, that's very, very difficult. So, how manufacturers approach sort of things even as simple as the contributors, trying to bring all of that information in a standard way, having the ability to have identifiers on all the information that when it goes into the cloud and into the cloud, then you've got the ability then to, process it correctly, to link it correctly, and all of that, processing that you need to do to sort of really sort of drive the value. That's one element for sure. So metadata and production metadata. And then the second sort of big area really would be, cross-domain identity management. So, we would be obviously trying to get away from Active Directory into that sort of, that's that SCIM protocol, so that, manufacturers then have that ability then to, help us then permission out down to the more granular level. So if you were building an enterprise system for users who could access or couldn't access some content, how do you do that in an enterprise way? So, those are some of the sort of the key big blockers for trying to build sort of, enterprise capabilities.
So I guess that message of standardization again, loud and clear, and I guess a more ubiquitous access methodology from enterprise. So we're going to open up to some questions from the audience, if that's okay. There are none planted, so anybody have any questions for Brendan or even Brian at Cloud First? Come on, who's going to do it? Here's a question.
I'm curious what you found that surprised you as you were going through all this material.
The complexity of the process was made greatly easier by sort of folks like, AWS actually doing what they said on the side of the tin, and folks like Brian's company doing what they said on the side of the tin, which was, managing and providing that, capability that you could operate your archive during the day, in the normal way, and then at night turn it into a feed center into AWS. So, that was great to have sort of partners like that you could sort of definitely trust and rely on. That was sort of probably the biggest thing for me. And then having our team. So we stood up an absolute crack team. We got sort of the best and the brightest, because it's a lot of hard sums in all of this type of space.
There's a question.
Hi. So I have 3 questions. The first question would be, did you have any content hours or years that had no metadata whatsoever, and how did you deal with that? And number 2 would be, what about human resources that you had to actually hire or keep in regards of the project? Did you have to hire more people or less people to work on it? My third question is, how did you get management? Because I know that stuff's expensive. How did you get management to actually invest into preserving the archives?
Yeah, great questions. Right. So number 1 was no, because it was an archive that has been sort of curated over a number of years. Now we do have uncatalogued, unbarcoded, and on sort of discovered content, but they're all on the sort of physical media. This was all sort of had been digitized or were born digital files. So no to the first one. Second question was around, yes, we brought in an additional resource as a service design manager, because we had to transition between sort of 2 or 3 different operating models, and we came up with sort of a new operating model for this in terms of how we would support it, who would talk to who, how they would talk to it, how they would take it, how they would communicate it, all those sort of things. So that was absolutely a crucial piece of work. And then the third question then was, we wrote in what we call in the BBC a TIC, technology investment case, and we were able to then look at all of the costs and all of the benefits, and then on paper then say, if we do this over this particular time, we'll be able to realize these benefits. So one of the benefits, for example, as maybe Ian alluded to, was we've now decommissioned one of the large Oracle tape robots that was in the West 1 data center. So that's a clear benefit that brings back sort of lots of space, but also very good from a sustainability point of view. And so if you look at automation and stuff like that there, you can sort of see how, the benefits all then stack up. And so we itemized those quite clearly in the business case 3 years ago, and we were able to then realize that over the course of the project.
One last one. So after you actually digitized all that, so did you actually, part of the monetization, did you actually have to put it on a platform for sales to others, or no, or it's just internal?
Well, because we're public service broadcasters, we don't really have to sort of do that side of it, but we it's interesting. BBC Studios are obviously commercial partners, and the content available to them through AWS now is just, expanding all the time. So they're seeing sort of increased sales. They're seeing easier access, faster access, because they used to have to queue for on-prem resources, where now it's a cloud copy across. And so the speed of delivery, the speed of transactions, the more availability of content is sort of quite sort of interesting for them.
Thank you for those questions. So just sort of summing up on that one before any other questions come out. So we've got cost benefit in terms of reduction of spend around LTO and or data center infrastructure. And then I guess one of the other aspects here is you're capable of right-sizing the storage based on the tiers of S3 which you guys are using. So there's some additional benefit that the organization can plan ahead to decide what storage class they want to use as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously one of the big power ones, we've seen something like on an annual basis, something like 1.5 million kettle boils. So it's some of this equipment, between that and the cache stores, they can run sort of quite hot.
So we can drink more tea in the UK. So thank you for that. Any more questions from the audience?
My question is, if all this content that has been digitized and archived is now available for searching some kind of management asset for people to use that and retrieve that.
Yes, we built our own search aggregation layer called Archive Search. So all of the content that's digitized is automatically published into Archive Search, and it's available across the enterprise. And we've developed something that we call smart fulfillment. So you can clip it and ship it to any destination from AWS directly out as either a proxy file or the original broadcast high-res asset. So it picks up a significant job, sends it down to the user, sends them a signed URL, and they can download it.
And how this search is based on the metadata, and how can you search all of it?
So the search runs in AWS Elasticsearch, and it's just based on, you can search by date, time, program, or all the content is either has transcripts or it has subtitles. So because we're broadcast, we do 100% subtitles. So if you want to search for a particular Latin phrase like Smoothie Nooks Fluffy Flora, you can type that in and you can find out. It'll jump to the video and you can clip that up and send it.
Thank you.
Hello?
Sorry, I can't resist.
Go for it.
First of all, to echo kudos to the BBC team. They were top notch. We were partnered on this from beginning to end. We spent a lot of time planning up front, and we couldn't have done it without such a crack team from your side as well. In terms of a question, why did you guys choose to build Archive Search yourselves and not look at some commercially available off-the-shelf MAM system?
Because of I suppose it was because there was so many sort of separate MAM systems that we would have to have so many separate instances. So it was an initial attempt to say, can we have one standard process here across the board? But it's really interesting now because we're sort of moving on to this sort of next data layer, and we'll probably have to then sort of more or less sort of rebuild some of the elements because we're going to this sort of content-centric approach as opposed to an asset-centric approach, based on the sort of the ability then to deduplicate, because one of the things of the fundamental parts of silos is that they have their own version of it. So you've got sort of 9 versions of something. So, like, for example, there's the powerful but true story of Dad's Army. So there's one episode of Dad's Army that has 125 episodes of the same program. So, so we're trying to sort of then go to this sort of deduplication through data. And then if you could imagine having a catalog where you've got you can go back in time to the 100 years of the BBC and have the metadata and the media correct. That would be a pretty cool thing from a sales point of view. So that's what I'm trying to do.
That's more cups of tea.
More cups of tea.
Many more cups of tea for that one. So, we're just doing a quick time check, so we're okay. So any more questions from the audience? So one final one from me. So you talked about accessibility, and I know you're in sort of relatively early phases post the ingest. Can you perhaps just provide a sort of glimpse of what you're planning on in terms of the kind of use cases that you're planning on for perhaps your journalists or your production teams to be able to use now you've actually digitize and ingest that archive?
Well, the Director General sort of recently talked about sort of rewiring the BBC, and that means about sort of rewiring it from a sort of a metadata point of view to try and sort of for us to derive value from the archive into the audience-facing products, so that we're aligning up on tagging technology, so people, places, things, and stuff like that, so that everything sort of flows in a virtual circle. We're looking at that's why I was saying about the cross-domain identity management. So we're looking at sort of being able to then apply a central function, say for example, restrictions, and bringing in temporal information into that, so that a journalist could make a query to say, I want a particular shot, and pass that request on to an API, that the archive then can satisfy that in an interesting and fulfilling way, as opposed to somebody spending hours and hours looking through potential good things or bad things. So it's that type of approach where we're really sort of trying to number one deduplicate these sort of silos. Number two, then sort of build up the capabilities for machine learning in particular. And then number three, then go on to add extra value. But at each stage, then, we're cognizant of the fact of, processing, images for artificial intelligence. That's, an expensive thing. So that will be, driven by value. So it's mostly sort of, text-based machine learning and all that type of stuff. So in stage one.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. If there's no more questions, I'm going to say thank you for listening and the active participation. That's always welcome. This will be the last session from this theatre today, but more tomorrow. I'd like to thank Brendan and the team
and Brian for spending the time here today walking us through this brilliant project. And I, for one, as a Brit, look forward to seeing more Dad's Army on the various channels that you have available to us. So thank you very much for your time. You're going to be around for a few minutes, as well as Brian. So if anybody has any questions they want to take offline, please feel free to come and catch the guys. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it.